Man, we're here doing it.
Yeah, dude.
Again. Can't stop the dream team. Just kidding.
Dude, we're like Charles. I don't know which one of us. Am I Charles Barkley?
I wouldn't know who the second person is in that scenario, so sure.
Michael Jordan.
Oh,
Larry
okay.
Bird. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
I guess we could say the dreamt team right now, right? It's over.
Yeah, like it's faded. It's gone.
Yeah.
Except in our memories.
Yeah, it's just, there should just be additions. Like, remember the dreamt team, and then like the dream team is the one that's happening right now.
Which I would know nothing about, personally.
I don't know if we even call it the dream team. We just have, I think the U.S. is still like by far the best basketball team in the world or something. They have to be.
Yeah, it's like Team USA. Just
like the Olympic,
team.
just like the Olympic team. Like whoever goes. Right. I don't know. I think the last time I watched them play, somebody on our team scored like 1,000 points. I don't know. I mean, it's just like our team is just so crazy. It's hard. Like the NBA is like, it's the reason. I mean, it's the NBA and the NFL probably can like bring in by far our best athletes. Like, as far as they're not going into like soccer or cricket, or golf, except for Tiger Woods. I don't know. I mean, like the PGA Tour just basically looks like a big group of like every dad from the neighborhood you grew up in, just with like weird, just with like maybe more expensive collared shirts on or something.
Right. Yeah.
Except for Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods could be in the conversation for like best athlete in the modern era.
Yeah. No doubt.
He trained with Navy SEALs, dude. I mean, that dude was hardcore.
Right. Tyler, why don't you seg us into Segue? Seg? Is seg a word by itself?
Probably in Brooklyn.
Sega.
Yeah.
I know it's not spelled the same. Why don't you intro this episode? Tell us what the hell we're talking about.
We are talking about Blowout, starring John Lithgow and John Travolta. A Tale of Two Johns. And that's not the name of the movie. It's but yeah, it's man. Who's a director?
Brian De Palma.
Yes. So it is a movie about a guy who is out. He's a sound effects guy in Hollywood
in the 1980s. Yeah,
in the 80s. And
so it's all analog.
Yeah, and it's which they like kind of drill into your brain.
Yeah.
And so basically the premise is he has to go out and find like better tree sounds, I think, right? Like better nature sounds for a horror movie that he's working on. And then he sees this accident happen, and he jumps in the lake his car goes off the bridge into the lake. It's kind of hard to figure out the scale of the bridge. I think like when they first introduced the bridge, it looked like it was pretty far up there. And then when he's there, it just looks like this sort of a thing. Like it goes down like 20 feet. Like it's just, they drop 20 feet or something. Yeah. Anyway, the car goes in, he jumps in, he saves a girl. He can't save the driver, who's a guy. He's dead. And then the story sort of goes from there as to who was in the car. Was it an accident, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, it kind of evolves into this mystery with a guy who has no place solving the mystery, but he is the only one who cares about it, and that there was something fishy behind it, he feels like. And so yeah, I guess I'll give the little mini silly disclaimer, like maybe go watch Brian De Palma's Blowout before you listen to this, because Tyler and I are not going to censor ourselves as far as spoilers and stuff, but
or in any other way, I guess.
It's yeah. And so I had recommended that we watch this movie because I was a fan of Brian De Palma already, and I had never seen this particular movie, and I unabashedly love John Travolta, especially young Travolta, when he was a big star in those days. People our age don't necessarily know that, but Saturday Night Fever. And
this is post Saturday Night Fever by a while, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, maybe only 6 years or so. I think that was 74, 75.
Okay.
Anyhow, but I love and we can go back to the premise itself, the story, but I love movies from this era because they just have so much texture. Like there's a lot in this movie in particular that is very physical.
Yep.
The action of him in his little studio with tons of tape decks and reel-to-reels, and the, you know, just giving you a flashback to this era where guys literally had to cut tape to put together music or film soundtracks or sound effects and stuff like that. There's something so satisfying about watching someone else do something that they're very skilled at.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds obscure, but I think that's part of the reason No Country for Old Men is so satisfying. So much of that movie is just no dialogue. It's guys doing little MacGyver things and, like, you know, healing their bodies in hotel rooms, or like rigging ridiculous shotguns, or
right.
And that, at least to me, I could watch that all day. Like, I want to find all the movies that are like that.
Yeah, and it's yeah, I mean, it's definitely, like you said, I mean, it's a completely analog movie, and it's interesting that the craftsmanship side does almost like take on like a character's role.
Yes. Yeah, craftsmanship. That's a good word for it.
It's just like you've got this guy who is earnestly trying to, and this was one of the interesting drivers for me of the movie, was that you've got this guy and he's got this like time sensitive thing, right? Like John Lithgow is just rolling around crushing people with an ice pick, and like,
right.
And it, like, this is not, he doesn't have an infinite, like, this isn't a research project or a college thing. This is like, he's got this thing that he thinks the president had this guy killed, who was his, like, the guy who was slated to beat him in the election.
Mm-hmm.
You find out. And he's trying to beat the clock, and every time he has to do something, it's like he has to go in. It's like the film equivalent of being like, I got to get to Boston, and from Washington, D.C., and then hopping on a horse. Like, yeah. I mean, it's just, the whole movie is that. Like, he's got to get to the end of this thing,
sure.
And he has a horse and a cart with all of his stuff in the back. And every time he finds something, he has to pull out his weird field kit and test it. Not literally, but it's just like, I don't know what this is. You know, like, it's just so foreign at this point. Because I think a lot of thrillers at this point are driven by, like a lot of James Bond movies are like, we found the guy, and then 11 seconds later, we launch a plane to go bomb the guy, right? Like, it's a totally different framework for a thriller than what you would see now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the nature of the time in which it was made, that was the pace of a thriller. Whereas now that the entire movie Blowout could have been like the cold opening to the new 007. You know, just this little boom, quick mystery, or whatever it is that they solve in 10 minutes because they're flying around everywhere.
Yeah, they're like, a drone saw that it was a gunshot, and so now we got to go. And that's why I think a lot of modern thrillers have to get so global in scale.
Yes.
Or the scale always has to be huge.
Yeah.
Because you can't just have someone like get lost in their, like, it's just like, who shot the guy? Like, in 15 minutes. And they're like, they go to the house and it's like, did you shoot the guy? And then it always has to be like, I did, but it's because this guy paid me, as he gets sniped through the window or something, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, because you can't, otherwise it's just a short film that's boring.
Sure. Yeah. And I think this might be a really snobby perspective, but I think in a weird way it is, I don't know if healthy is the right word, but for people our age to watch films that are older than our present time, because they do take patience and just paying attention and just rolling with the pace that is being presented to you, instead of just blasting through a 90-minute story where you're being titillated every second.
Yeah, I mean, if this was, if you had this same technology in a Fast and Furious movie, it would be as long as all 3 Lord of the Rings movies. It's just not possible to pull off without, like, all right, I'm going to mail a letter with the secret thing, and then 3 months later, I deciphered the letter. Now we got to go to this place, right? I mean, it's just, you've got to get, and that's why I think this film did so well, was it never really distracted you from the smallness of the situation. Like it had this thing that, yeah, this conspiracy kind of goes all the way to the top, right? But the smallness of the whole movie is like John Lithgow chasing this. I don't remember the woman actress's name.
Nancy Allen.
Okay, I don't think I've ever seen her in a movie.
She's just been in a couple of things. She was in the original RoboCop.
Wow,
but
okay.
her career did not have much longevity.
Yeah. But John Lithgow's chasing Nancy Allen and John Travolta around, and I don't know what the city is.
Right, I don't either. I don't know if they ever established.
Yeah.
They might.
I might have just missed it.
Yeah, it might be Washington.
It
come
could
to think
be DC.
of it,
Well, yeah,
because it is related to the
well,
election.
he's the California governor, though, right? So hypothetically, it could be. I didn't see anything that was like, oh, we're in Los Angeles.
Sure,
it probably was in DC. You're probably right about that.
Yeah. So I'm curious. My assumption is, and tell me if I'm wrong. Do you watch a lot of movies from this era?
No.
Okay. So in what ways? Well, I mean, what was enjoyable about it, or different than current movies, or just satisfying to you? You know, and was it boring to the point ever that you wanted to turn it off?
No, I actually really, really liked it a lot. I never felt like turning it off or like I needed a break from it. I just went to Alamo Drafthouse to watch.
That is my holy church.
Yeah, man. Well, I was not a priest, but I was in the pews and to watch Breakfast Club.
Perfect.
And this is the opposite of a John Hughes movie. It reminded me a little bit. It doesn't have the same action, tensity. Is that a tension? Tensity is not a word. Tension. That it didn't have the same tension that Die Hard
sure
had,
yeah,
but
yeah.
It had that same kind of nostalgia for me, even though I don't know where on the timeline those line up, but it was just oh man, this is like a classic thriller movie that doesn't make me nostalgic for high school or the explanation of youth or any broader concept. Well, there are a lot of broader concepts in this movie, but it wasn't anything that was obvious. Whereas I think sometimes when I watch 80s, some of the more, this might be very famous, but some of the more famous 80s movies, it feels like they exist in a world in which they've come to be sort of the spokesman for the 80s.
Yes.
And the spokespersons for the 80s. I don't know. Anyway, spokespersons. Anyway. And this didn't feel like that. It just felt like, holy shit, this is a great movie from the 80s. Yeah. And is clearly from the 80s. And they have the amazing, towards the end where they're at the parade thing and the whole celebration. And he's got that whole scene and it's all the lights on him on top of the building, and where it has that just definitive, not from the 2000s feel.
Yes.
And I love that. What about you? Because I imagine you do watch a lot of movies from this era.
I mean, I'm getting more versed in that. I certainly have come to realize in the past few years how much I enjoy it, and just how much of a history of cinema there is that I have yet to see, which excites me a lot. So yeah, and I mean, kind of like I said, just the texture of it, even the cameras they were using in those days, the film stock they were using. Obviously, it was shot on film because that's the only option they had. But there's a weird, there's a grain to it. There's a fogginess to the picture, and I think some of that is specific to De Palma. He often will fill his images with smoke. On the set there will be a little fog machine, and just to give it this eerie haze.
Yep.
And yeah, so it's so satisfying, just the craftsmanship of this movie being made by a director who by this point was very comfortable. He knew his style, he knew what he was going for, and was able to make very specific choices. And even I feel like the camera itself is a character. When there is this long tracking shot when you, the viewer, are seeing as if you're John Lithgow's point of view, and he's a horrific, disgusting murderer, and he's just following this woman you know, so uncomfortable for a long time, and you know he has intent to kill her, and he picks up an ice pick and like you see it in his hand right in front of the camera. That is so thrilling.
Yeah.
You know, and he lets it sit. The director lets you stay in that moment for long enough to get uncomfortable. And I feel like that is the definition of good cinema.
Yeah, like, man, that's perfect. Yeah, it's very it's one of those things where you don't need to see the knife go into a human body.
Yes.
You don't need to see the, like, and that's where I think a lot of cinema has gone, right, into kind of this literalism.
Yeah, they got to show us
where it's like, and I understand that. Like, I think there's like an art to that, in the sense of, like, that's unpacking a different thing, right? That's saying that, like, there isn't any art about someone getting knifed. It's a thing. It's like a knife going into a body, and you watch it and you're like, shit, this is brutal. Like, this is just animalistically brutal. And this movie wasn't saying that there's an art to killing per se, but it was like, it puts you into that tension where you don't know if she's going to get away. Ever. Like, there's a few scenes, not always from John Lithgow's perspective, but there's a few scenes where he's like stalking women to kill them. And you're like, dude, I don't know. Like, she could get on the bus and then he's like, he doesn't kill her. Or maybe she leaves the train station and he doesn't kill her, or like whatever. And there was like every single time for me watching this, there was never necessarily a sense of inevitability about it. There was a sense of just that, like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And you were in it. Like, you got nervous watching it, and you were just like, what? Like, the narrative, like, retreated for a moment, right? Which is one of the things I thought was so interesting about John Lithgow's character, was that he had these, like, the way that I think, you know, that it was communicated so well, that how much of like a psychopath he was like, all of a sudden there's a few moments in the movie where the movie didn't matter. Like, the story didn't matter. He was just tracking a woman unrelated to anything, and he was just killing her. And he gets this like tunnel vision, right? Which is like, okay, yeah, there's like a more dominant impulse in him than just calculated evil. There's like he like almost couldn't help himself at that train station scene, right? And for like 5 minutes, nothing related to the president having his rival killed, or, you know, anything else mattered.
Yeah.
And he captured that so well.
Yes. And not many movies today take the time for those asides, you know? And I'm going to keep harping on that just because I love that and feel like that is what makes a good director. But yeah, just taking the time to move away from the main story and just give you a little more context, whether into this killer or just the scope of the world in that time and place.
Or the times where he's John Travolta is in the Hollywood studios trying to get samples for the Scream for the movie, right? Like, he never completely detaches from the story as the movie goes on, but you still have these settings where it's just like, oh shit, yeah, this dude works at a movie studio, and he has to go do movie studio stuff,
right?
You know, like, he is like, you know, he is like kind of an Encyclopedia Brown character, but like in a way worse situation than just figuring out who stole the golf ball or whatever. But like, but
so
like,
true. I used to read those books. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just mean, like, but he is kind of that, like, he exists in this very like Joe Briefcase world, and he's a kind of like an upper echelon grunt at this studio. And then he stumbles on this thing, and you never feel like he didn't just stumble on it.
Yeah.
You know, like, he could have easily just not been there.
Right.
And then nobody would have ever known.
Yeah.
And like at the lake, and that felt really true. Like, if this were going to happen, it makes complete sense that it would be a weird audio effects guy at the lake with his stupid camera pointing it at a frog, and then like the car comes flying off the bridge, and then in he goes to be like temporary Superman.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It does a good job of establishing just how alone he is. And I know that's what you were just saying, but you find out pretty early, like the cops are not interested. Like they just want to cover up the guy dying in the car as fast as possible. They're dismissive of the woman who John Travolta saved. And Travolta is still just like, no, there is something fishy about this. And he's utterly alone in solving it and figuring it out.
And they do a good job of that, because you can even imagine from the commissioner's perspective, and it feels a little bit like they obviously have a history, right? And it seems like, and so when I say Hollywood studio, it seems like it must obviously be in Los Angeles. If he's at a film studio.
Yeah, that could be. I guess that's our answer, maybe.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know why I didn't say that earlier, but I'm dense. But anyway, like you can imagine a police commissioner who, like this dude was on the force, right? John Travolta, you find out, is on the force. He used to do like the wiretapping, like he was on the other side of the wiretapping for them. And you have the scene where his friend gets like cinched up in the bathroom because he does the battery wrong and it's burning a hole in him.
Yeah.
Anyway, and he can't save him, right? And so you know that there's obviously relational fallout from the wiretapping guy fucked up, and our like field chief guy got killed because of it. And you can imagine the commissioner just being like, he's like kind of fuck off, but kind of okay, I'll look at it.
Yeah.
And but you know, they probably have 400 cases open.
Yeah.
And it's like the chief is kind of, it doesn't ever feel like the chief is like in on anything. He's just like, dude, I think the car went off the bridge and the guy died.
Yeah. Like, leave it alone.
Just like, I don't like,
deal with.
Who cares? And you've got this weird, it's like the equivalent of like a, I don't know. It would be like if you were the police commissioner and a guy, like a guy from Reddit came into your office and was like, Elvis is still alive.
Mm-hmm. Like I have good reason to believe.
No, literally Elvis is alive.
Yeah.
I found, like I didn't just see him at a gas station. Like I have this really thought out, evidence supported thing that I need you to look at. And he's just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I can't care. I can't care. It's my job. I have to get 400 cases closed. I can't care about your weird conspiracy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I wanted to mention the way that the beginning of the movie, the cold opening, to use that term again, kind of tricks you to where you're introduced to what you think is the movie, and that plays out. There's a bunch of nude girls at a party and another killer stalker thing. And then all of a sudden it zooms out and you realize, okay, these are two guys in a projection booth, like watching a film that they're making. And that I just love little moments like that are so clever, where basically, I mean, nobody in the audience could have, it just, damn it, I can't articulate this well. But it's like it jerks you out of what you thought you were in.
Right.
You know, and so that already adds this layer of like, you can't trust everything that you're seeing, which is interesting.
Right. And they messed with that with the camera angles. So I think with the camera angles, like the scene is specifically that I'm thinking of right now is the scene where he's putting the, you know, maybe halfway through the movie or something, he's putting his tapes in the video, like up in the ceiling.
Yep.
And it's shot from down on the street, like looking up into the window. And you're like, dude, I don't know. Like that could be John Lithgow, like seeing him do it.
Yeah.
And then like, you don't know. And he adds there's a lot of incredible shots in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things that and there's some that are just like, oh wow, that's a really cool shot to have done, given the like, it's just obviously like a person up in like a helicopter or on top of a build, like in a helicopter probably, like shooting some of the like him driving scenes or whatever, where it's like from way up and then it's down on the street, and it's just brilliant. It's like and that stuff is like cool, but then that stuff is brilliant and just like, wow, that's really cool that he like put so many different shots into a scene that like could have just had a dashboard camera for
Sure.
most of it.
Yeah.
But then there's those scenes where he's kind of like fucking with you. And he already set the precedent at the beginning that he could be messing with you, but you don't know.
Yeah.
Like you never feel like, oh, I'm watching another movie. You never get put back into like the studio produced movie world again.
Mm-hmm.
But you're kind of like on edge for the rest of the movie of like, how is he going to do that in a more subtle way?
Yes. Yeah, on edge is a good way to put it. Yeah. There's a moment, and I'm cheating in describing this because I watched a documentary about De Palma where he sits down and goes through all his movies. There is a moment where Travolta, it's kind of at like 2/3 of the way through semi-climax, where he's really close to figuring something out, and the camera is rotating from the center of the room around this room as John is like digging through tapes and scrambling to put something together. The director said, I wanted it to feel like the viewer is sitting on a reel-to-reel that is just rolling.
Dude.
It's like, fuck,
Yeah.
that's brilliant.
Yeah,
It's like, oh my gosh, because you get such a sense of the space. It builds tension because John is worked up, and his room is getting more and more messy as he throws stuff off of shelves. And man, it's stuff like that I'm like, yes, this is a master of his craft.
Well, and I think the fact that it begins with that movie clip, and then you have all the movie imagery in it, like all of the mechanics, right? It's just the mechanics for the audio and like he's doing audio and video, like, and film, but you get this sense that it's like you're almost watching a movie of a movie because it's just like the same. He has to go through the same like processes to solve a crime as you go through to make a movie.
Yeah.
Right. And that adds a super interesting, like almost tangible level to it, or like visceral level to it. That one, obviously what we said before is frustrating and whatever, and that he builds tension with some of that stuff.
Right.
But it's also just interesting, like the mechanics of making a movie never leave this movie. And even like like at the beginning where like the like slasher movie where I forget what it was, like Sorority Bloodbath or whatever the name,
ridiculous.
Some stupid some just awful movie.
Right.
It's you get the sense that at the beginning it ends up being very meaningful. Well, it's very meaningful in a lot of ways, but it ends up being really interesting that in that movie you have in that they were making Sorority Bloodbath. God. I kind of want to say the name a bunch, and I kind of never want to say it again. Like, not because it's just like it's just like a movie that like Quentin Tarantino would have made when he was 16 or something, right? Like, it's
like
just
a fourth-rate terrible horror movie.
Awful, dude. Yeah, just bottom. It's just dregs.
Right.
Yeah, but so you have this girl who's about to get stabbed by some like fucked up dude who you see him in the mirror briefly. He's like he just looks. I don't know. It's a weird, like, oh, okay. Like, we're going to see the guy, I guess, for a second. And then, like, he's going into the shower to, like, hack the girl, and they stop it right before, right? And then it's like, and he's like, see, that scream fucking sucks, whatever he says.
Yeah.
And he's looking for a sample for this scream. And then at the end of the movie, he has it. And the interesting thing is that in both situations, you have this, like, basically unrescuable person. Right? A person that is at a moment of like sheer terror that they are going to die. Like, it doesn't matter if a SWAT team goes into the sorority house right then, that girl is dead.
Yeah.
Like, no one else is, but that girl is for sure dead. And like the scream that he uses for it at the end was from someone who was in the same situation. And that's like, it's crazy that he ties the loop like that, where it's just like, I mean, there's so much else that we could talk about that, and I'm sure we will. But I just mean, like, that was such an interesting, like, almost movie-making element that he brought full circle.
Right.
Maybe in a real sort of way, like REEL, in that same way that you were talking about, where, like, it does come full circle in that sense, and you have this weird feeling at the end of the movie that we have a lot of feelings at the end of the movie, but one of them is, like, damn. Like,
Yeah.
We just use our sheer human emotions to make our art more believable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, I don't know. I was just struck by that. I mean,
Yeah.
it was crazy. It was brilliant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the movie ends very bleak. Like, it could have ended at the big celebration where the woman does die. And Travolta is so close to saving her, but he just can't quite get there. John Lithgow is one step ahead of him. You know, it could have ended there, and that would have been pretty bleak on its own. But then Travolta takes the sound clip, since Nancy Allen was wearing a wire, and like her real scream in death is then put into this crummy movie. You know, and there's a weird element of like, man, is Travolta super fucked up for doing that, or is that just kind of what we do?
Right.
You know? Yeah, because of course it's dark, but you have to be like, I kind of get it. I kind of understand why you did that.
I think it's what we do. I mean, in the sense that it's like a brutal take on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it has to be saying that on some level. And you have him like getting tortured, like hearing the scream over and over again as they're like going back through it and like being like, yeah, this is right. And he's like sweating and having like I mean, that dude is, at this point, that dude is like beyond fucked up.
He's
like,
ruined.
That's it. Like, there's no way out of that. Like, he needs to go join a cult or something and just chill. You know, like he needs to go to like an infinite yoga retreat.
Yeah.
At that point, like in a sort of like, he needs to just be put out to pasture, kind of like, I think he's seen, it's like his life. And that's the interesting thing about Blowout as a title, I think, is that it's kind of about the obvious thing that happens.
Right.
And it's also about like this dude, right? I mean, he is kind of like a blowout at the end of it. Like, you're not going to fix a fucking tire that got a bullet through it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like one of those things. There's like a sense of futility to that, to him, to John Travolta's character. That's like, he is earnestly right the whole movie. He doesn't even try to sleep with the girl, right? Like, I'm not even saying that's bad, but I just mean like, there's no part of this movie where you're like, I don't know how I feel about this dude. Or I don't even know how I feel about this girl. Like, it's super interesting, for instance, that she makes a point that she never had sex with any of the people that she was getting paid to set up.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it was just a weird thing that she said, like, for 1 second. It's not, I wouldn't be like, oh, she's shitty for sleeping with them. It's just, I'm not trying to make a moral claim on any of that shit, but I just mean, it's interesting that you have these two, like, nearly impossibly pure people. Like, it's believable, but they're right up to the edge. Like, right there of, like, they're human, clearly human, and just they have a simplicity that is like a deep simplicity to both of them. That's not, I don't mean that in like that they're ignorant or not smart or whatever. Those are two different things. But I just mean, I'm not saying they're like, oh shucks, like Gomer piling around in the movie. It's just that that sets up this really interesting good versus evil thing at the core of the story, right? Because the other part of the end is that he kills John Lithgow with the ice pick, which has to be like, first of all, it's just incredible that nobody gets caught for anything in this movie.
Yeah,
like just a police officer be somewhere, like at some point, like he drives his fucking Jeep through a parade, through the Liberty Bell parade, and no one chases him.
Yeah.
He goes in, like, he just goes away. And it feels like the police are just like, well, like, first of all, there's no way that you're speeding down the middle of a parade and there's no fatalities.
Right.
It's not possible. He's going 70 miles an hour or something, and you just have these weird clown people jumping out of the way. Like, just an infinite number of, like, Uncle Sams and, like, Uncle Samettes just jumping out of the way in their weird costumes.
Right.
And he wrecks.
Yeah.
He drives his car through the front window of a... and then the car must be registered to him. right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, he must have a driver's license. And then he runs out of the back of the ambulance. And then at the end of the movie, we find him back at his job.
Right, like no consequences.
Just like what?
Just right
There's
back
like
to it.
it's not even like it's not even like an amoral universe that they're running around in. It's one in which like there just seems to be no, like, purposely no consequences for anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the parade is interesting to go on a different point. That car chase could have happened, first of all, at night with empty streets.
Yeah.
But instead they put it in the middle of the day on like a momentous day with tons of people around, which, granted, from a filmmaking perspective, like, that adds to the excitement kind of, but also just I mean, this is maybe weird to say, but having made a movie myself, a tiny, simple little movie, just the reality of having to set up those shots, oh my gosh, and all the extras involved, and like roaring a Jeep through a ton of people sounds like a nightmare.
Can you imagine if like they're like cameraman 7 is like, fuck, sorry guys, my camera wasn't on.
Right.
Like, just
Yeah.
like,
Oh, it's horrifying. Yeah.
Shit guys, I'm sorry. I thought,
like, I didn't hit record. I'm
yes,
sorry.
oh my God, I'm so sorry. Can we just run it back real quick?
Yeah.
And you have 8,000 people get back in line and
Right. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that keeps me awake at night, thinking, even though I'm not the one in the situation, I'm like, I never want to make anything that complicated.
Right.
And yet it makes for like a very compelling few minutes.
yeah, dude.
But goodness sakes, wow.
Well, that's kind of like a action movie thing, right? Like,
Sure.
how many movies have we seen where it's like, the president's got to speak at the thing, and then the guy's like, I'm the sniper guy, I got to shoot him, and then there's like 2 minutes of him like dialing in his crosshairs from some like forbidden window and like whatever, and it's like everybody's on their radios like, there's a sniper on 15th floor and whatever, you know. It's like that happens so many times, like that awful Forrest Whitaker movie about like the explosion that happens from like every
yes.
person's angle or something.
Oh gosh, I know what you mean. Where it happens between like people's camcorders picking up various angles.
I hated that movie. Maybe I just wasn't sentient enough at the time to get it, but I just never cared about that movie.
Sure. Yeah, it's like that's an entire movie of just, we're trying to build this as stressful as possible.
Yeah, and then at the end it's like, I don't know, man, the dude's dead.
Yeah, like it made no difference.
Like, they got him. They got him with the thing. Like, it's. You know what I mean? It's just like,
yes,
there's no,
absolutely.
the axe never, the other foot never falls in that movie.
Sure.
And I think in a lot of movies like this, the other foot never falls. It's just, you have this like larger than life foreign terrorist group or person, like the Jackal, who's like, I'm the Jackal, I kill people.
Yeah, and he's like invincible.
I have bleached hair.
Right.
I'm never in the room when you get there. Like, and then this like impossible person or force. And then you have these guys who are like, oh man, I didn't go to Harvard for this shit. And then they're like trying to solve the thing before the Jackal shoots the guy. And that's the movie. Like, he either shoots him or he doesn't. He usually doesn't, right? Like, they usually get him beforehand. And this movie, the fact that it ended the way that it did was like, in my mind, what took it from, oh, it's a good movie. Like, if he had gone up there and he saved the girl and he stabbed John Lithgow.
Could have totally had a happy ending.
Yeah, and then like, and it's
resolve.
like a year later, and it's like he's editing film, and she comes in and she's like, you know, hey there, cowboy, or some stupid 80s flirting thing.
That would be the line. Like,
yeah,
precisely
just
that. Yeah.
Like, and then that's the end, and he's like, yo, I got your scream, I'm gonna use it in my movie. And she's like, you're the best, or
right.
whatever.
And she's like sitting on his lap in the studio and like gives him a kiss. Yeah,
right. And then the movie's over.
Yeah.
Like, and that didn't happen, which was like super refreshing.
Yes. Yeah.
Because otherwise it was going to be like a procedural thriller thing where it's like, my heart rate went up and then it went down.
Yeah.
And then that's it.
And you can walk out of the theater like feeling all right about the world.
Yeah.
But
oh man, God, like Captain America guy saved it again. And it was super refreshing for it to be not that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Although I felt kind of sad. But
totally. Yes. Very sad. Yeah. The credits roll and you're like, oh gosh. Like I feel like I need to go just watch a stupid YouTube video and laugh about something,
Yeah.
like bring my spirits back up.
And I would like to say that I was sad a little bit that John Lithgow died at the end of this movie, because the whole movie I had like cooked up in my mind that we could possibly be in a universe where John Lithgow, this is like the early days of the Trinity Killer from Dexter.
Yeah.
Like this is like his
Right.
his elementary school or middle
Sure.
school of serial killing.
Yes.
And he just like really dials it in over the next like 20 years, 20-ish years,
Yeah.
15 years. And then he starts wreaking havoc in Miami.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, it is funny to make those connections with actors who have played not even similar characters, but just sadistic killers. And yeah, weirdly in this specific way, that does kind of connect. I was going to say, again, just speaking to modern movies. So now that we, as a generation and the generation younger than us, especially, we've seen everything,
Mm-hmm.
Through the power of CGI and whatever else. And I'm not even naysaying those things, but it is like with the new Fast and the Furious, now it's just like, what weird scenario can we put these guys in to make this more exciting?
Yeah.
Because the streets of New York or Los Angeles are no longer exciting enough.
Yeah,
like,
now we have
be
a decked out like Corvette in the Arctic.
Exactly.
Like,
yes. Yeah, or like, why does Star Wars Rogue One have to suddenly be on like this tropical beach?
Right.
Because we haven't seen Star Wars in that setting yet.
Right.
Like I do think those sort of visual cues are very specific choices, and I tend to prefer. I mean, even though it's eye candy and it's visually satisfying, the almost the only like I get separated from the story because the only reason they're putting us there is to make it more interesting.
Right.
Because it's like, well, we've already done a snow world. We've already done like a desert world.
Right.
Like, what's different?
Let's have them start on a desert world, and then they'll go to a snow world, and then they'll go to a jungle world, and then they'll go to like a created planet, and then the movie's over.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, and it is exciting, but it's just interesting to see. Back to the parade, like in that day in 1980 when they made this, people had seen plenty of car chases. So it's like, how do we up the ante? How do we make this not just another car chase with like a talented driver screeching around empty streets, and that's what Mission Impossible is built on. That's what 007 is built on, is just unique settings and scenarios.
Right. And they just switch. And I love all the James Bond movies.
Yeah.
They're amazing. Especially the new ones are awesome. The last one was okay. It was like it was great. It was just the least great of like, I feel like, of the last four, but it was still like it was still an amazing Bond film. It's still like, I don't really have to get into Bond movies, but
please,
no, I just mean like I mean, you're right. I mean, it's one of those things where that's the problem, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're just telling each other stories. That's like that's maybe the second oldest profession behind prostitution. I don't know, but like humans have just been telling each other stories. That's all we've ever done. Mm-hmm. It's like the only thing we're good at. We're not good at like taking care of each other very well. We're not good at like making sure everybody has enough food or water, but we're really good at, and we should be good at those things. I just mean like we just have never been.
Yeah.
But we've always been really good at stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's not a problem, but there's a limitation to it, right? Because we're limited creatures. And so like we basically have 3 or 4 sort of story structures or like arcs. I mean, It's basically like the hero is on a journey and he gets to the end and wins, or he gets to the end and loses.
Yeah.
And like you can just, it's really probably 2. And then there's just been like 100,000 iterations of like, how do you tweak that to make it this one a little more interesting than that one? And the characters are different and the like settings different and and whatever. But I think like this movie I think the reason that great filmmaking stays fresh is that like You can watch a movie like Youth, for instance, which I think I may have mentioned last time, but
Mm-hmm.
I just mean like that just popped into mind. It's a recency bias, but it's like there is kind of a weird arc to the characters there.
Yeah.
And like a great filmmaking maybe has either one really incredible arc, which I think this was kind of that. Like there wasn't a lot of character development here. Nobody changed. People just were themselves in a weird situation.
Yeah.
Although maybe John Lithgow changed in that he went from alive to dead. And the girl changed in that she went from alive to dead. But John Travolta sort of just he felt like kind of the central thing here.
Yeah.
And he went he was trying to redeem his past, right? Like you kind of get that after his friend gets killed by the mafia guys, that like, he's got this thing stuck in his craw about like, I let my friend down.
Yeah.
Because I fucked something up.
Right.
Right. And so I gotta redeem the past here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna blow this story wide open because I saw it and I have this fire in me to not be the guy who let his friend die.
Yeah.
And then you get to the
obligation.
end. Right. And then you get the impression that that's kind of why he's doing this.
Yeah.
Because like a bunch of people, like even if either of us were there and we're like, I got the audio, that was kind of weird. And I saved the girl. And like, oh, the guy was the guy running against the president. That's crazy. Most
probably wouldn't have taken that far.
No, dude. You had one interaction with John Lithgow, the like Iceman, and you're just like, all right, you know what? Actually, I don't care. Like, I want to go home and watch Netflix and not get killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just mean like there's a thing in him that is driving him through those barriers and like through those like kind of levels of fear and like like exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And the end of it is that the hero doesn't redeem himself.
Yeah, that speaks to an interesting decision in storytelling, because there's this thing where, any given story, you're choosing a point in the character's life to begin and you're choosing a point to end the story, the narrative. And that's kind of an ambiguous choice. We could have seen John Travolta first thing in the morning and like getting ready, and here's his routine, and then he gets to the studio, and like that each intentional choice tells us something a little bit more about who they are and what their life looks like. And I guess I don't really have a point in that other than that every story breaks down in that way, and the decision of where to end the narrative, and presumably that character goes on with the rest of their life. That's where like choosing those start and end points can make for some magic, right? Can leave some room for the imagination. And I think bad stories, or at least less satisfying ones, give us that like tied up perfect ending, where presumably they go on to have a great life. And like, this was the one big event, and then they're happy forever, even though no human actually operates that way. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, dude. Yeah. No, I mean, it's like the infinitely receding horizon of like Pride and Prejudiceism, where it's just like, oh yeah, the camera goes away up into the sky, and all these people are happy at the wedding or whatever it is, whatever the equivalent is. They found the money, they got home with the gold, or whatever it is, and they all bought sweet stereos, whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter. I think that was the Italian Job, but anyway, like. You understand that like the thing that's eating at people is not a thing that's fixed by any of the things that are happening in a just a purely like scalably human level, like where it's just like, that there's still, it's like the problem with, it's like at the end of, it's like medieval. I think it's kind of, and this existed way before that, but I just mean like it's kind of this medievalism in storytelling where it's like, oh, there's a good king in the land. Everyone's great. That's never happened.
Right.
Ever. No one has ever gotten married and then their whole life was amazing.
Yeah.
No one has ever stolen the money and then or got their money back, or their business got sold or whatever, and then they were just happy forever. But it ties into all those, like, I think like not lower level, but just like more simplistic
Yeah.
narratives, they tie into a thing in which they tie into a part of our almost like our psyche
Yes.
that feels really true.
Yeah.
Like it's not demonstrably true.
Right.
Like you couldn't ever, it's never happened ever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And even though, and not to say that people have never been happy. What I mean by that is, like, let's say you marry the best possible person for you. If there was a way to quantify that, I'm sure in 100 years there will be, and it'll be awful. But I just mean, like, let's say it happened.
Yeah.
You found your Guinevere, but you're Lancelot, and that's the real one, right? Like, and King Arthur died of a stroke, and you get to be together forever in your, like, woodsy cabin thing or in a castle or whatever the fuck. You still know that every human knows that, like, in any situation like that specifically, there are still tons of times where, like, things aren't great.
Yeah. Like
your relationship isn't great, you're fighting a lot, or like your work isn't great, or like you have to pay taxes, or you didn't pay taxes, or you can't pay taxes, or like, you know, all these things that come into your life, or like you have to wait in line forever at the grocery store, or like, I guess in the Lancelot thing, like you sent somebody out to shoot a thing for you and they couldn't find one, and you're like, I really want that thing, I want to eat veal tonight and I can't.
Yeah.
Or I want to eat venison. You don't have to hunt a young cow, you just kind of kill it, I think. But like, you just, like, there's always that, like, friction in human life that never goes away. And I think for me and for you, I think, like, I tend to gravitate towards people that capture that. And it's like, it's realism, but not realism in the sense of like an artistic trope or like philosophy, but just, this is the world as it is.
Yes.
And I think, like, those narratives tend to be a little bit more, they're just like fast food, right? Like,
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like, it's not, I love fast food. Like, I would go to Taco Bell right now, but I just mean, like, I love Taco Bell. I love a lot of I love Chick-fil-A too. I love all of it. But anyway, the point is that I never go in there and I'm like, you know what? I am never going to have to eat again.
Yeah, it's not permanently nourishing, even though it's satisfying.
It's just, it tastes really good right now. That's all I'm looking for. Like, I'm not looking for like Jillian Michaels to give me a high five after I eat here and be like, you're enlightened, right? Yeah. And I think that it's a quest for, like, personal. A lot of those stories, I think, fit into our ongoing internal narrative that's like a quest for personal redemption. And we think that if only we could like tie our cart onto a horse like that, we'd be fine.
Yeah.
And it just has never ever been true. And so I think, like, I still love that stuff, but I don't love it in the sense that I think that that's the way the world is.
Right.
I love it in the sense that, like, part of art is an escapism thing. And I like the fact that sometimes it's great to go into a theater and not be a part of the real world and watch people fly around in impossible ships and shoot each other with lasers and save, you know, Princess Peach at the end. Like, that's cool. It's just not, there's no like juice to squeeze. Right. Yes. Like, yeah,
absolutely. On that note, to take it to somewhere that might seem really silly, but I have a decently strong conviction about this. I think that a generation of maybe young women in particular have been messed up by Disney movies and romantic comedies without even realizing it. Because in those narratives, and not that there is anything inherently wrong with them, but there is a period of trepidation, and then they do get Prince Charming, and like you were just saying, the wedding happens, and then life is presumably perfect from there on. And when you see enough of those things, I think a certain kind of person can believe that should be true. That you go through this, you know, quirky, ridiculous thing with like a guy you bumped into at a Starbucks, and then, you know, you have some weird tension, and then you end up with him, and it's like so happy and such a relief that you're finally with the guy that you were chasing, or reverse that, you know, to the girl you were chasing or whatever. And then you know, when we see these movies that are so airbrushed and beautiful, and we see people we see actors who appear to be genuinely happy, that I think that seeps into our thinking to where we think, oh, is that what my relationship is supposed to look like? Like, am I supposed to be that happy all the time? And if I'm not, what am I getting wrong about all of this?
Right.
Because I'm for sure getting it wrong.
Well, and I would say that's not so much girls, but I would just say anyone. Like, you could trace it to, like, the impact of, like, Victorian era literature on just every person that has ever read it. Or, like, because, I mean, think about it. Like, you have Great Expectations, right? Which basically only works because it's pulling the intestines out of what that story is supposed to be, right? I mean, it's like, oh, actually, at the end of the book, the girl doesn't give a fuck about him because her grandmother said so or whatever. I don't remember. I mean, I read it in high school. I hated that book.
Sure. But he does not get the girl right at the end.
No.
Yeah. He gets the fortune, doesn't he?
I don't remember.
Does he even, I don't know that story.
I just remember, I don't know. I was like way dialed in on girls. I still am, but I just mean like, I just remember the part of like, oh man, it didn't work out. Like, but it's one of those things that like I think everybody has that. Well, I think it's just that everybody has, and this is why I find like absurdism or nihilism or like existentialism so compelling personally, because I resonate the most with people who understand that the thing is never the thing, which frees you weirdly to then enjoy it for what it is. Right. Like, I think, for instance, you know, learning to digest love as a thing that is incredible and worthy of your time and energy and like sacrificing things and all that stuff. Like, it's worthy of that. But it's not the thing that's going to keep you in this permanent bliss. And that there is no such thing as permanent bliss. And I think that a lot of, you know, both of us like grew up, you know, conservative Christian or whatever. And there's this idea that like, no, God is permanent bliss. And it's like, well, that's not even true in my life. Like, or like we have this concept of heaven, that's permanent bliss, which sounds exhausting, but also like, okay, what would that be?
Yeah.
Like, I can't relate to that. Like, that's exciting, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's just not a thing that I could ever, like, it's not a thing that I could ever, like, express in a meaningful way. Like, hey, you know what? I think because of course you would, if you lived in this world, which we do, as far as we know, at least, that, like, how could you not basically fantasize about a place where all of the like, because like the world is like 80% bad. Like, your life is kind of like 80% bad. It's just everything you do is just like John Travolta's having to put the thing with the thing and prove the video to someone. And you got to sit in your weird room and do all this stupid work that sucks to do something that is maybe meaningful.
Right. And yet there's no reward for it, at least in that case.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like you, on some level, like, I think like, and I think understanding that it's just hardship. And what I was going to say is like, it's not crazy that you live in a world that's 80% bad and you imagine a world in which it's 100% good. Like, that's not crazy. I'm not saying it's not possibly true or something. I'm just saying that like, that's a very natural thing to be like, man, my life isn't just a bunch of pain and then some really good stuff and then I go away and I don't matter anymore. Like, nobody likes to think that.
Sure.
And it's, you know, I mean, like, Camus was probably the first really good marketer of it, right? But not the first, but he was great he was great on the marketing team, marketing and PR for like sort of nihilism. Not strictly, but just, I mean, you get the point.
Oh yeah.
But I just mean like there's, and so from that perspective, I think we are, a lot of like more simplistic narratives give us a tiny little taste of having like some kind of assurance that ultimately a good thing happens. And I'm not saying it does. I'm not trying to be. It's just like, dude. A lot of times it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times it does, in a loop. So like you could say, okay, like from age 19 to 29, at the end of that, a good thing happened.
Sure.
Or you could say from 30 to 50, maybe you could say like, oh, a really good thing came out of that, and that's great. But you're always pushed right back into the water of like you're still out there on your boat on this pretty like really fucking choppy sea.
Yeah.
And you're wiser, and maybe you're there with someone you really love, or you're there with your friends or family or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're all in a choppy boat, like on a, like you're all getting thrown around at times. And that's where I think for me, great art exists. It's in the like, hey, I don't know if we're going to be okay, but this is what's happening and this is what's true. And that's the stuff that I resonate with the most.
Yeah.
Like that's the only fire that I can seem to like gather around regularly without feeling a little bit guilty.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you and I and a good deal of people take a weird sort of comfort in narratives, movies or books or whatever, or even music albums that do have this, whether a bleak ending or a melancholy nature to them, something that is not purely just bubblegum all wrapped up in a bow by the end, because that rings true for us, right? Mm-hmm. The melancholy, the dissonance, the tension that is in that. It's like, okay, thank God someone else feels what I feel. And yet I think there are obviously some who can listen to Depeche Mode and be like, oh, that makes me way too sad. I don't want to dwell on that. I don't want to dwell on that darkness.
Right.
I want to stay with the happy stuff. And that's totally fine. It's all preference and how you view the world and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I guess just the simple fact of recognizing that others can make great art and like push their suffering or dissonance into it and be like, yeah, dude, this is me. Mm-hmm. Like maybe this is amazing in your eyes, but I feel like a piece of garbage every day. And like the one exciting moment for me was actually just putting out this piece of art.
Right. No, totally. No, and it's a kind of anesthetic, right? But it's good. I mean, I think that's why I think it's, if you were to dial in on the human experience and like, I don't know, you were to read through some of the more like probably poetic sections of like any sacred text. I mean, we can reference the Bible because that's like the easiest one for both of us, but that there is this idea of like Anne Lamott's very good at this, right? Like heaven is kind of now. Like it's not this thing out there. It's like imagine John Travolta at the end of this movie. He's losing his shit. And then he goes to like trauma therapy and he has somebody like literally just help him get out of this thing and be like, you know what, dude? Like you had two awful things happen that like you were doing what anyone would do. Like anyone could have messed up that battery thing, and most people wouldn't have even tried to go save the girl. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just saying that like most people are sort of cerebrally heroic, but sort of being viscerally heroic is very different. Yeah. Right. And so he goes through therapy. He finds a little bit of a foothold to kind of like heal. And then he reads like Rilke and he reads like Letters to a Young Poet. And he's like, oh man, I do need to be just kind of growing my inner solitude, and, loving someone is protecting their inner solitude and letting them grow their inner solitude. And he whatever he reads, and you can imagine him like being okay. The director, to your point about the endings, the director does not want us to feel that that's possible. Yeah. And I think that adds to like the bite. Like all great art forms rely on boundaries, right? They rely on a limitation. Like it's the song ends at a certain place, the movie ends at a certain place, the painting focuses on a certain thing or sees a scene in a certain way through a certain lens. And it's a restriction. Like all art necessarily is a restriction because we live in a world in which everything is always happening, kind of. I mean, like maybe literally, like it's like that. I forgot this the other night, but it's just like that. The concept or the idea that like everything that can happen will happen doesn't necessarily mean that in your specific life,
right,
that's true. But in a system that's complex enough, every possible interaction will happen, right? Which is what we're dealing with. We have 7 billion people. Imagine all the stories happening all the time. We have an infinite resource of short stories, basically, or long stories.
Yeah.
But I just mean, in that sense, like in this specific film, he doesn't want us. He wants the sharp tooth at the end. Yeah. He wants that like bite into you right at the end, where you have this guy. Not only is the girl dead, but you have this guy listening to her screaming and getting killed by John Lithgow. He's standing in his fucking studio by himself with his headphones on, listening to it. And then you find out after that, you think he's like, God damn, this dude is fucking morose. And then you find out that he's editing.
Yeah.
He's finding the right scream.
Yeah.
And then he's suffering, and then the movie's over.
Right.
And that's what De Palma wanted us to leave with, right? But we know that narrative doesn't end there unless he like kills himself.
Yeah.
Right? I just mean like his story isn't done, but De Palma's done telling it, which is like totally different, which is like a really interesting tension at the end of this movie.
Right.
I feel like. What do you
absolutely.
think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That made me think of, I wanted to say this earlier and forgot. This is more maybe getting off of that and on just where to end stories, but the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks.
Oh yeah, man. Wilson, dude.
My dad and I had conversations about this at the time because I was, I don't know, maybe 16 or so. And I remember at the time that was a pretty big movie. You know, Tom Hanks was really in his prime, like this lengthy 20-year prime. And so that was an exciting movie and it was very enjoyable, but I always wished that it would end at the moment when he's on his raft that is falling apart and the big, huge ship comes by and he reaches his hand out, boom, end credits right there.
Totally.
Don't take me back to his home where he's like put weight back on and he looks normal and he's having his ice in his cup and he's talking to Helen Hunt and he can't get her back. Like, that feels patched in or something. That felt untrue to that narrative. And I know I'm wildly careening off of what you just said.
No, I think it actually fits really well.
But that is one where I was just like, don't try to give me the good ending. The more satisfying thing would have been leave it mostly ambiguous, but yet you pretty much know he gets saved.
Right.
Like I don't need his life after the big event, because then that almost felt like a whole different movie beginning.
Totally.
You know, and so I don't have a point to that other than that I've always wanted to say that on a microphone.
Dude, I love it, dude. I love it. I have like a super annoying counterpoint.
Please.
So I think the thing that's cool about that is that I think you could reverse engineer that. Like you could start from the end of that movie and build backwards into the narrative, and basically see the statement of that movie being that like Tom Hanks's life blows up, literally.
Mm-hmm.
He survives a crash that is not possible really to survive. He has like 1 in a million chance going down in that plane to even have all his limbs.
Yeah.
Much less, like, I would believe it if it was like, oh fuck, my leg's gone, but like I landed on this hot metal and it seared it shut, it cauterized it or something. Right? I mean, that's more believable than like, oh my god, I was on a FedEx plane and now I just run around with all my limbs on a island.
Yeah, throwing spears at fish.
Yeah, but I think like there's like, it's an interesting narrative, right? Which is that like you have this dude from modern society thrust into this like the most primal situation you could be in. But there's no like evil, like there's no tiger on the island.
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no like present danger.
Sure.
It's just him on an island. I mean, a tiger could never live on that fucking island. There's no food for it. But I just mean like, it's like the size. Like Barry Bonds could probably hit a home run, mostly over the island. And that there's anyway. The point is that like you have this dude, and he's like
so specific.
I know everything. He has to pull out. He has to pull his tooth out or knock his tooth out with a ice skate.
Yep.
And like you see it and you're like, oh man, this sucks for him. But he has this he has a volleyball that he puts coconut leaf hair on and draws with I think some of his blood, right? Like he draws the face.
When he puts his bloody hand on it, that makes the face.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so and the crazy thing is that I think that in some weird way that movie is making a statement that Tom Hanks was actually happier on that island than he was ever going to be if he got off of it again.
Yeah.
Like this brute fact happened and it was just like, all right, dude, that sucks. I'm not saying I would have just, I don't know. I don't know how to build a raft, and I would never trust a raft that I built to go out on the ocean to find something. So like in that sense, I would have never left the island because it would just be too stressful. And I'd be like, I'm definitely going to get eaten by a shark if I go out there because my raft is going to come apart. I might not get eaten by a shark if I stay on the island and I just go up to like my knees in the water. Anyway, that's dealing with anxiety. I wouldn't have had any of my meds if I was on the island, so I would have just been a wreck. But I think like the point is like he gets off the island and you have this narrative of like he got saved, and it's like he didn't really get saved. He went back to a life that was worse. Like he doesn't have Wilson, which I think is like, it's hilarious to say, but he had like a real bond with a volleyball.
Yeah.
That was at that point, and we don't see him past like, oh man, Helen Hunt. We don't see him get on eHarmony, right? And find the real love of his life or whatever that old dude always says in the commercials. But again, that's a directorial decision.
Sure.
It's like he goes back and he is left in suburban loneliness, knowing that his wife lives like because he just drives away, right? Like he gets in his car. I think that's how he like goes to those crossroads and like drives off somewhere, right? Is that how the movie ends?
He goes and delivers the one package that he never opened.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So
staying true to the FedEx.
Yeah, man. God, that was the best FedEx commercial I've ever seen. Except for the plane blowing up part. I don't know what they paid to be in that movie, but the fact that, even if, I mean, it's incredible, right? It's like, even if one of our FedEx reps lives on an island for like 6 years, you're still going to get it.
Uh-huh.
Like, we can't help with tracking.
Yeah.
But you're still going to get it. You're still going to get the thing. And they still did. But I just mean, like, that movie, it just seems like from his decision to leave the island, you think like, and it's fucking with the, oh my gosh, what's the, that weird, I took a whole class on this book. I can't believe I can't remember it. Robinson Crusoe.
Okay.
It's like fucking with that, with that story. It's like, because Robinson Crusoe gets off the island. It's a dumb book. I wrote a whole essay on basically how the British Empire invented cannibalism to treat people badly. Anyway, we don't need to get into that. This is a long time ago. That's what you do when you're 21. What else are you going to do?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of.
You think you're super important with thoughts like
dude.
that.
Look, I wasn't getting laid at that time. I was just drinking a lot and writing stupid essays about Robinson Crusoe. So, like, I probably, my life could have been better. It just wasn't. So I was writing these essays. But I just mean, Robinson Crusoe gets off the island, he goes back, and I think he becomes like some big merchant guy, and he comes back and like buys the island and like does all this stuff, right? And it's like this whole treatise on like, see, imperialism really is fixing the world because the savages are better off with us, right? And like that movie turns that upside down, and it's like Robinson Crusoe goes back and his life is worse than it was when he was on the island.
Yeah.
Which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
But also your point is great. That ending would have been better. I agree with that. Because I have mined that movie for way too much. Like, I don't think it supports a lot of the things I just said.
Sure. No,
But
I like your perspective, and I'm glad that you were that familiar with it to have that big of a take on it. Because we were probably close in age when we saw that, and I mean, I saw it a couple times, but it has stuck with me for whatever reason. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing when you leave a movie, and at least in my mind, I'm like, that was 92% good,
yes,
but the 8% should have been different. And
Yep.
I know that's such the most
no, dude, that's great.
stupid thing
It's
ever
not
because it
stupid.
doesn't matter. But
It does. I mean, it does matter to you.
sure,
I mean,
sure.
it's
I
just
guess
like-
it was part of my training,
Yeah.
storytelling training. It's like, okay, don't do that because I don't like it.
Right.
Yeah,
No, that's great. I mean, it's important to you and is important to your development.
sure.
So that's great. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I fucking hate that Great Expectations book.
Mm.
I got shouted down at a book club or party thing one time because I said that was my least favorite book of all time.
Oh man, and they were like, "How dare you?"
Yeah,
Charles
they're like, "Oh
Dickens
my
is
God."
the master of English literature.
He's the master of word count.
Yeah.
He's the master of getting paid by the word, for sure. Like
Yeah.
he's the Michael Jordan of getting paid by the word
Yeah,
for stories that, and this is true of a lot of Victorian literature. It just doesn't have to go on that long. Like, and I think it's like, I mean, I understand it. It came out of like, I understand that a lot of like the Pride and like a lot of the Pride and Prejudice shit. Like, I actually really love Jane Austen, but I just mean like that whole stuff came out of like English parlorism,
mm-hmm.
where it was like literally our life is going to the same party 7,000 times.
Yeah,
and that was like a very like insular group, but I just mean like Jane Austen's basically, she's doing her own like making fun of that, right? Which is great. She was like kind of like not she was a little bit Oscar Wilde-ish in that way. Or Oscar, I guess what I should say is Oscar Wilde was a different vein of Jane Austen. Is what I should say. I don't want to like always relate the woman to the man. The man is Oscar Wilde is like doing the same thing. But it's just like, okay, we have these fucking long books because we have nothing to do, and that's not really it. But it feels that way when I read them. It's just like, yeah, it's 700 pages of people playing cards and dating intrigue.
Yeah.
Like, shoot me in the face. I mean, I've read it. I've read some of it, and I really do love Jane Austen. I just mean like, God.
Yeah, I got you.
Like just the number, just the amount of words that it takes to be like, oh, rich guy likes a poor girl, and the rich guy's aunt doesn't like the poor girl. She likes the rich girl, but the rich guy decides to marry the poor girl.
Yeah, that maybe speaks to like people's attention being longer, and that
Totally.
maybe was there are bats flying over Tyler and I's head real close.
Oh yeah, dude. I think this is when
fire starting. Maybe?
Well, I think, dude, I think the Antichrist might be about to come back. This is pretty exciting. We're going to see
being
him
swarmed with his minions.
Yeah, I'm excited to see him. I mean, just like, okay, so,
purely for interest's sake.
yeah, just like
what's he all about?
academically,
Yeah.
like I'm probably going to die, but academically, it's interesting
Right.
to be there for a moment like that.
Speaking of beginnings and endings, and you can speak to this too because you are a podcaster. I'm so bad at beginning and ending podcasts. And I'm not saying we have to end it right now, but that always has felt, I mean, I've done 50-something episodes, and the beginning and end always feels clunky to me. Because maybe because I'm sure I overthink it, and because I want to present something that feels complete.
Yep.
But even the nature of just being on a Skype call with someone and being like, well, all right, thanks so much, and like, see ya later. I don't know. I just envision others listening to it and cringing of like, whoa, that derailed real fast.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like, I mean, totally, dude. I like my podcast has like a producer now who is like, has helped me a lot in making it, because our episodes are 30 to 45 minutes.
Sure.
And so he comes in and will give me like the 5-minute signal
nice.
through the window.
So then you can kind of be like,
and
well,
then it's
as
just
we're
like,
wrapping up.
And then it'll just be, someone will say something, and then it'll just be like, okay, like, because our show, when it's not artist interviews,
Yeah.
it's always like music writers or people that I know, like people that live in music kind of thing, on to talk about an album.
Right.
And that's something where you get a sense of when, okay,
they're kind of done.
or just when, like, okay, we said enough stuff.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
Like,
yeah, that's a better way to
in the
say
sense
it.
of, like, because in that sense, it's a very limited thing. It's like, let's talk about the album. And like for any artist, it's like you're going to talk about their backstory. You're going to talk about the music on the record. You're going to talk about it in the context of their career.
Yeah.
But you want to do that in interesting ways. But that's like the spine. And once you hit those 3 points, it's like, okay, like I want, and my show's different. It's like I want it to be like you're on the train and you can listen to it all the way through on your way to work.
Yeah.
Or something. Like it's just done.
Sure.
In 30 minutes, or 35 minutes or 40 minutes. And it's just like, okay, I heard I learned some stuff about the band. I think I might go listen to the album. And they talked about like an interesting offshoot from that thing. And then it was over.
Yeah.
But I think like, I also really love podcasts where they just like, not ramble, but they just get into like interesting thing after, I'm not saying everything that we've said tonight is interesting or that every long podcast is interesting, but just that I love the ones where because I love like the rambly, like where could this go, and just the way that they connect things.
Yeah.
And so I listen to like Mark Maron or Tim Ferriss or like people who have 3-hour episodes.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting to me, where does Ryan Adams go in a 2-hour episode?
Yeah.
Right. Or whatever.
Absolutely.
Like he ends up getting into like the weeds. Or like he did Mark did an incredible episode with Bruce Springsteen.
Yes.
And it was just like, yeah,
great.
I would love to listen to Bruce Springsteen, like just go from thing to thing to thing about life for 2 hours or whatever it was, right? Like, so I like that stuff. I think there's a place for both. My show's just not that. So mine has like very strict boundaries.
Yeah. And I think that's necessary for sure when yours is kind of set in a very specific brand and people are there for a specific thing.
Right.
And it's interesting, having talked to enough people now, you can tell the people, the guests, you can tell the ones who are pretty much there to just talk about their thing and then be done. Like you are just one in a line of many interviews that they have to get through. And then the great ones, thankfully, are the ones who, like you said, get off in the weeds. They just start telling stories. And it's like, all right, now we're getting to know you.
Right.
And it's not just centered on like, what was the inspiration for this song?
Yeah. And I think for me and for anyone who's like hosting a show, it's like realizing that the point isn't you. Yeah. The point is the guest or the album. And so like, I was really bad at that early on. I'm still probably bad at it, but I'm less bad at it now, of like literally not talking, like in the sense of just asking a question and just letting them go, and like prepping the questions ahead of time enough that like I have a spine to bring it back to if they don't want to ramble. And they do, because like, especially with artists, it's like you just never know. You're catching them in a cycle, right? So if you're interviewing an artist in the middle of an album cycle, like the build up to an album, like the beginning of an album cycle, basically, like you are one of many, no matter what. Yeah. And so like every once in a while, like I just went to Ryan Schreiber's apartment. He's a guy that started Pitchfork, and I interviewed him, and I was on, the interview was only 40 minutes, but I was just there I interviewed him about like records, like albums he loved and whatever. And he was like, dude, I never get to do albums like this. This is awesome.
Wow.
I this is the interview I've always wanted to do, and I've never really gotten to do. And that's the kind of thing where for me, it's like the way I've tried to grow in it is like, how do you create an environment for them to talk about the stuff that's on their mind or that they really care about, rather than like, why did you write song 6? Yeah. Or like, I don't know, were you sad? And I've asked all those stupid questions, and I've had interviews not go anywhere, and like, you just learn that, right? Sure. I mean, you're the same. Like, I mean, both of us, anyone who does it is just like, yeah, you have to stop injecting yourself into it so much. right?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe not you, I do. But
No.
like that's because I always wanted to early on. I just wanted to say a smart thing to somebody to make them my friend,
Right. Absolutely.
which never happens.
Yeah. You want to stand out to them in some particular way that they're like, oh wow, this guy's interesting. Like he sees through it.
Oh, dude, this dude
And-
fucking rules, man.
Yeah.
Dude, come to my party, man.
And
Like,
yeah, exactly. And in my mind fantasizes about ridiculous things like that anyway.
well, no, it's funny though because that's where that's like the myth of celebrity, right? And we worship it because we want it to be possible to be larger than life.
Yeah.
And that's on some level people have transcended that myth, like Prince. I mean, like, I would have no idea what to talk to Prince about.
Right.
Right. But like, in general, it's just like trial and error and just meeting enough people. You just realize that you like idolize. You just realize like, and that could be anyone. It could be like a writer. It could be like a friend you think is cool. It could be anything, but just like, once you are around it enough, you just realize they're just a person that does a thing that went well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and it's like,
Very
and
true.
they're like, you know, most, not all, but most are just like, well, all of them are, no, I mean, all of them are just people. Most of them are aware of that fact and are like, are kind of as surprised as you are
Uh-huh.
or more surprised than you are.
Definitely.
That like they go somewhere and somebody knows who they are.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's good to give them like a lazy boy to sit in conversationally for an hour or 30 minutes where it's just like, and you're never going to get a great interview every time.
Right.
You're never going to have a great guest every time. It just will not happen.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
I'd be curious along those lines what you think about. I think about people like Miley Cyrus or Selena Gomez or Justin Bieber.
Yeah.
People who hit extreme fame super young and just, I mean, I guess the basis of my argument or thought is just like, how could you possibly be a well-balanced or mature human being by 30 when you were thrown into this huge celebrity status and being told you're amazing 24/7 and just surrounded by people who are affirming you, maybe falsely, you know,
Right.
who are just trying to get close to the thing that you are. I, in a weird way, feel bad for those people. And I think actually we're starting to see that a little bit with Bieber. Not that I keep up with him.
I do.
But you do see those things about him, you know, canceling his tour and writing that letter. And I think that was a very mature move. But just on a larger scope, I don't know that we've ever been in another time as a people where super young people were getting huge amounts of notoriety and money
On a scale, like I
before
mean,
they
the
were
Jackson
even-
5, like I mean,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like on scale, where it's like, and it's part of the reason that we're like, oh my God, so many famous people are dying all the time, and it's like, well, yeah, but it's
Yeah.
because there's so many famous people now.
Right.
It's just there's so many people to die. Like there's not 20 notable, like universally known artists
Right.
anymore.
There's
There's like a
thousands.
bazillion.
Yeah.
But no, dude, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I think, so this will always be true. And is that like the audience creates the monsters they want to hate, right? So like here's the deal. Justin Bieber was like one of the most famous people on planet Earth when he was like 16. The fact that he's still alive is he wins.
Yeah.
Like nobody listening to this, nobody alive, having universal access to everything and being known everywhere, almost no one would make it out of that in this kind of shape that he has.
Sure.
Like literally people are like, I can't believe Justin Bieber went to a Brazilian like whorehouse or what I don't know brothel. Whorehouse is bad. Whorehouse is a bad term because it makes it seem...
Are you making an example, or did that happen?
No, that happened.
Oh, okay. I don't know about this.
Whorehouse is a really bad term. I'm sorry that
But
I
like
used
something
it, but like
shady like
I just
that.
I didn't know what to call it, but I guess it's a brothel. But like whorehouse is really bad because it makes it seem like women who have sex a lot are bad, and that's not true. But I just want to say that like he went to this brothel, right? Like, and they took pictures of him leaving with what presumably was like a Brazilian prostitute or whatever. This was years ago. And it was like, everyone's like, I can't believe this dude claims to be like a Christian and like he's like a role model for my, whoever suburban kid,
Sure.
all the parents being like, I can't believe that he would do something like this with the platform he has. It's like, dude, you have never been anywhere close to having a platform that is a 10th or 100th the size that he has. And the thing is, it's true that there's a lot of people that love these people. And there's a ton of people who hate them just because a lot of people love them, right? And so, like, imagine living in a world in which every single thing that you do is photographed and picked apart. And then
it's horrifying.
On top of that, you're still putting out music that's really great. Justin Bieber is an incredible artist. Like, he hasn't put out all incredible albums. I don't care as much about some of his older albums, but like his last 2 records have been awesome. Like, they were awesome. And it's just that people love to hate him, right? I mean, people love to hate successful, like, symbols. And they love to be like, I could write that song. That's not true. Nobody that I've never heard somebody say, I could write a Katy Perry song who actually could.
Yeah.
It's not, she's not, and they're like, they just work with like a whole team of songwriters. And it's like, yeah, because like their artistic arc is to create music that a shit ton of people resonate with. And it's like, it's fine. Like, not every pop star can be Prince or Michael Jackson. That's not the rubric here.
Yeah.
Like, those dudes were 1 in 7 billion.
Yeah.
Not literally. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are as talented who didn't have a chance or something, but I just mean like it's just, you can't compare that stuff. Like, it's just, we have pop stars that we love to say that pop music is a reduction and that it's oversimplified and it's stupefying and whatever. And I don't think that's true. I think that like pop stardom and pop music in particular, pop music plays a really important role in the progression of music. It always has. It's literally short for popular music. So it's like Elvis, it's true. Like, Elvis basically copped a bunch of like African American music and made it, and was just a white dude singing it.
Yeah.
Elvis had a shit ton of people writing his stuff and helping him and whatever. Nobody cares about Elvis. Everybody loves Elvis.
Yeah.
Most people love Elvis.
And people have no qualms today about being like, Elvis was a huge influence on my work today in 2017,
right?
Or the Beatles or Rolling Stones,
dude. And that's the thing. It's just that it's a recency bias, but the other way, where they think that Elvis or Michael Jackson or whoever back then was the real thing. And it's like, what was back then is that there were like the major labels ran everything as far as radio went. So the reason that so many people knew Elvis was because every radio station was playing it all the time.
Yeah.
They weren't playing Townes Van Zandt. I mean, those timelines don't necessarily line up, but I just mean like, hypothetically, it's like nobody was playing, like almost no one was playing Townes Van Zandt everywhere. I mean, he was still like known, but he wasn't, and I'm not comparing them. I mean, their talent was, Townes Van Zandt is brilliant, but I just mean like it's apples and oranges on some level. But I just mean like with a pop star, it's like, yeah, you are living in a world where like there's already a generation of kids who are making music because of Kanye West. Yeah. Get over it. Like, he's brilliant. I don't give a shit. Like, if Mozart had a fucking Twitter account, can you imagine Mozart drunk tweeting from the brothel? Like, just don't even get me started on like, social media has just created this sense that it's existed every generation. That like, this generation is the worst one for some stupid reason. This one just happens to be that Twitter has just ruined celebrity for everyone, because you see people all the time. We never did before. We saw them either we saw them on the front of a magazine at most. Somebody took a picture of them somewhere, and then there was an interview maybe, but most of the time it was like, it's like the equivalent of like, imagine a bunch of Polaroid, imagine TMZ going after Elvis or going after Michael Jackson, which kind of happened, but just like, oh, here's Michael Jackson eating an ice cream cone. Here's Elvis going to Burger King. Here's and it's like everybody wants to, and Kanye said this, but it's like everybody wants to talk about Kanye eating an ice cream cone. And it's just crazy. It's just like this obsession with this thing that people are like, I hate him so much. And I'm like, you're talking about him all the time.
Yeah.
And he's brilliant. You have to get over the fact that you may not like his music or like him as a person. It doesn't matter. You wouldn't have liked pretty much any of the people that you look up to in music. You would have not liked them as people. Nobody would have liked Keith Richards. What did Keith Richards wanted to do drugs and hang out with mostly naked girls at the Chateau pool in LA or wherever or the literal Chateau, and play rock music. He was very serious about his music. Nobody was he was incredibly serious. He was he's one of the best electric guitar players of all time. Nobody would have liked Keith Richards if they had an ongoing daily expose of who he was as a person. It's just that people want to get on a high horse and be like, all the best music was a long time ago. Yeah. Which there's no, obviously I feel strongly about this, but there's just no, that's probably the dumbest thing that I hear people say on a regular basis.
Yeah.
If I could boil modern stupidity down to one topic when it comes to culture, it would be that all the real and good stuff happened a long time ago, and all this new stuff is bullshit.
Yeah.
Because you can go in a time machine back to the 70s, and everybody those people's age or who thought like that were saying that about the current people's favorite bands.
Right.
And it's I just don't care about that. I don't listen to that, because that is an unavoidable human culture thing that the past or the future is the best. Or not everybody thinks that, but there's always a group of people who have their fucking picket signs up who need to talk shit about Justin Bieber's pop album or Miley Cyrus or Katy Perry or Kesha or Beyonce, although I hear that less, and Kanye or Jay-Z or whoever it is. And it's I just don't care.
Yeah.
You can think it's you're right. I'm not saying I'm better than you. I just don't care about hearing that. I'm not saying this to you. If you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But I just mean in the Twitter sphere, the Twitter sphere of whatever, and just the ongoing conversations I have, I don't care. I don't care to engage it anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not possibly true in an objective way. It's fine if you don't like any of their music. That's great.
Right.
That's not bad. I understand that's a human thing to connect with music, but you can't extend it out and be also this whole era is bullshit, except for these few sweaty dudes who still play real rock and roll or whatever, right? That's just dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm totally in agreement. That's a good perspective. And in a way, it's it's a disservice to these artists a bit, but it's also nothing's going to change it, and it's only going to continue to progress in that way. Or, maybe as a society we'll feel the need to stop knowing what these people are doing every moment of every day. But what you said a minute ago just made me think in a positive sense. There could be artists 50 years from now who are yeah, Selena Gomez was a huge influence.
Dude, totally.
I love her work. Those are great albums, because that person might be younger and disconnected to all the bullshit that's happening now.
No, it was I just interviewed Laura Lee from Empress of when I was in LA, and she was going on and on about how much Mariah Carey and Selena
mm-hmm.
Inspired her as a kid, and and that's the same as some kid being I started making music because of Beyonce or Katy Perry.
Yeah.
It just is. Things don't become objectively right just because they're old. It's the same reason that the respecting your elders thing always bothers me. Like, definitely respecting them in the sense that, like, I am not on a quest, on like an egotistical quest to conquer the people I meet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I have a shit ton. I've learned so many things from so many people that I've met. And so I try to have this disposition of like, I think there's always something to learn from someone, and like and I mean that in like a subdued, like hopefully humble way.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't even mean that in a sense of like, I see other people as like tiny coal mines of meaning for myself, but just that like, I don't know many things, and I don't even know the stuff that I know very well. But like, it bothers me when like ageism bothers me wherever it's found. Like, I go to the Louvre and that doesn't seem like ageism. It's just like, holy shit, there's these artists alive and this is really cool and really good. But the idea of like the only real painter is Michelangelo is like the dumbest thing that, or like the only real sculptor is Michelangelo. The only real painter is Da Vinci, man. And obviously Michelangelo painted as well. But I just mean like, that's just so stupid. And all you're doing is extending the timeline.
Yeah.
If you're like, Madonna was the last great pop star. Okay. Why?
Yeah.
That's not true. She was a person who made pop music. She's not like the fountain of a genre. She's someone who participates in it.
Yeah.
And genre is just marketing. I mean, genre is just a marketing tool, but I just mean,
for sure.
Yeah, obviously I get riled up about that stuff. I just hate it when it's like, no, listen to me because I'm older. And it's like, I'll listen to you I'll listen to you. I give credence to your experience and that it's bigger than mine. And so I will go into it being like, this person probably knows a lot more than I do.
Mm.
But if you just start saying stuff like that, then it's like, okay, they from my perspective, this isn't helping anything.
Absolutely. Yes.
This is
that's probably
it's not moving
term.
anything forward here.
Right. Yeah.
It's just making you feel better about whatever thing you particularly like.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think modern people that love music should be open to any genre. And if you don't like something, that's totally fine. But I think like, if you're going to talk shit about something, I think you should at least know it really, really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not just a passing opinion that's like,
or like
fired
Justin
by...
Bieber seems like an asshole. Okay. I mean, anybody would seem like, if that many cameras followed any of us around all the time, there would be a group of people that were like, I don't know, Josh Gaines is a real dick because he didn't say thank you. He didn't tip the bartender at that one bar that one time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how stupid is that? Like, where are you in your life where, like, I don't think it's dumb to follow celebrity news. I think it's dumb to follow celebrity news and extract moral, like, outcomes from it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's sit down and talk with our kids about why. I mean, like, Justin Bieber getting, like, pulled over for racing his Lamborghini in Miami when he was 19 or 20 or whatever. It's like, dude, listen, every single person on this planet would love to get pulled over for driving a Lamborghini 120 miles an hour in Miami. If you don't, then there's like, either there's something wrong with you or like you're lying to me.
Yeah.
Because there's something pretty awesome about that.
Mm-hmm.
But we won't be like, I'm not like Justin Bieber. I like do all the stuff on time and nobody has a bad opinion on me, which is not true. But it's just, it's like, what's the comparison class here? You're just like, your micro moralism.
Yeah. There's a definite lack of sort of putting yourself in those shoes and just recognizing like that would be all of us.
And I'm not saying that Justin Bieber has never been an asshole.
Sure.
And I'm not saying he's like above reproach at all. I just mean that if I heard people digesting someone as like the low hanging fruit of cultural targets,
mm-hmm.
if I heard somebody digesting Justin Bieber like thoughtfully, that's great. You don't have to love his music, but if you're just like, I would never do that, that's not true. People are capable of anything, given the right context. And second, like, what are you getting out of that? What is your Justin Bieber hatred doing for you?
Yeah, basically just firing up other people for a couple minutes on
It's like
Twitter
you're just turning yourself into a tiny Rush Limbaugh for a second.
Yeah.
And if that's what you want to do, then that's fine. We're not going to, not you, but I mean, if people want to do that, that's fine. A lot of people want to do that, and I'm just not interested. But like other people will be, and I need to get a beer, so I'm just like trying to. Sorry, that went a little. I got a little intense.
No, that's specifically why I brought it up with you, because I knew that you are more educated than me in that regard, and I can be guilty of the ageism thing a little bit, even in terms of earlier on this podcast talking about how, in my perspective, or the things that I appreciate and enjoy tend to be older. And I hope that comes across as I just want to encourage people my age to like make sure that they're seeking out older pieces of art and not just consuming the Marvel movies. But also because it is a recognition that there is such value and joy to be had, and that sometimes the current things, just at least for me, they don't do it for me. And so I hope I come across not as snooty and more as like encouraging of like, hey, there's amazing stuff you've never even heard of. And that's one of the things that's much to learn in that regard.
No, dude, that's one of the things that's really fun about talking about movies with you, is because that's where I think anybody goes from being, because we were talking about boundaries earlier in art, right? And I think it's a necessary thing. It's a necessary outworking from our own limitations. Like, human beings are limited, and you cannot be anybody. That's a lie that the internet culture as a whole has like allowed people to think is true. I'm not saying, I don't think that the internet as a thing is like guiding anything. It's not like, it's not sentient. It's just a huge platform for where basically anyone can say anything. And I feel like where people go from being, because I think it's the angle or the trajectory or the tone, right? Where it's like, hey, you know what? I really love old films, and I hey, I really love old films, and I know them a lot, and so I have not saying you do, but like you could have a podcast on like old films and why they're important, and that's like an amazing show. Like you just talking about an old film, and it's like, yeah, I listen to this thing all the time because I don't know old films, so I listen to it and then I go listen to the stuff because I need somebody to help me explore film, because like you have an entire generation, and this is like, it's our version of it for like in rap, for instance, is like a lot of us grew up thinking that like 50 Cent was like the biggest rapper ever, but it's like when you're 12 or 14 or 15, what are you going to know unless you have parents or friends who are like, no, man, go back and listen to this stuff.
Yeah, for a lot of us, Indie Club was the first rap song like we'd
ever existed. That was the first one. That
we're
was
like, whoa, this is fun.
That was the Adam and Eve of rap for us, right? So like, I just mean like that's understandable, and I think like it's dumb to say that. I think it's equally dumb to a counterpoint to what I said earlier. I think it's equally bad and dumb, like you were saying, to just say that only what's now is what's good or matters. Like that's also not true. That's just as bad.
Sure.
And I think like, I don't think everybody needs to be a walking encyclopedia of cultural knowledge.
No.
That's just something that
not at all.
You and I happen to find compelling and interesting, but
right.
But I think the idea of just like being purposely closed-minded is different than just not knowing stuff.
Yeah.
Like nobody knows everything. And if you're curious about something and it's something that you're passionate about, then I think it's always weird to me when someone's really passionate about something or just they think about it, or they like voice their opinion all the time about something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obvious that they just have been like underexposed.
Yeah.
Because I would say that all of us have been underexposed, and that will always be true, right? There will always be more artists you haven't heard, more movies you haven't seen, more books you haven't read. You will always be underexposed.
Mm-hmm.
But going into something as if you're not underexposed in a way that's like, all of this is bullshit, I think both sides of that, there's like kind of two sides that you can be on at the extremes there, and I think both of them are really bad. and kind of
Yeah.
like, and I say stupid in the sense that I really think it's almost like stupefying. Like it makes you think about the world in a way that is untrue.
Yeah.
In a way that's quantifiably, knowably not that way. Like
Sure.
you could argue about like religion forever or whatever. That's fine. We're never going to really know what's exactly right. It could be nothing. It could be one idea. It could be all the ideas. Who knows? But when it comes to like music history or film, it's like, no, you can't. You just objectively cannot hold a position that all the good stuff is new or all the good stuff is old.
Right.
Or the only new good stuff is the stuff that sounds like it's old. Or the only old stuff is the stuff that reminds us of what's good. It's like the same way, like I've done this in the, like this is a reference that I've done and like I've heard a lot, it's not a lot, but a few other people make is like when you're a millennial or like when you're under 40, it's like, or 35, it's hard not to go back and talk about Sgt. Pepper's in terms of it sounding like a Radiohead album. That's the only direction you could begin at,
because those are both points of reference,
right?
for
Unless you
people
grew
our
up in a
age.
house, where they just your family loved the Beatles and you listen to Sgt. Pepper's and then you listen to Radiohead later. Like most people, I think have probably listened to Radiohead before the Beatles, or at least before Sgt. Pepper's. Like I'm sure people as kids heard the Beatles and whatever. And I just mean that like that's one of those directional things that is like totally fine. It's okay. That's just your frame of reference and that's all right. But being like the Beatles don't matter, Radiohead matters, or Radiohead sucks, the Beatles are the only band that matters. Like those things are both equally dumb. You can just not like them. That's fine. I just mean like if you're trying to make like a transcendent generational like stylistic thing out of it, that's fine. If you're just like, I like the Beatles, I hate Radiohead or vice versa, that's totally fine. But you could never be like the Beatles are overrated. Like you could never really say that in the sense of like musical impact.
Mm-hmm.
You could think they're overrated in the sense you don't like them. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's speaking, wrongly speaking from a point of authority, I think. And Twitter is full of millions of people who are acting as if they are authorities. And I've been guilty of that too. Made like, these testament proclamations, out of some emotional fury about something that completely doesn't matter.
Well, everybody has been, think about it. Like, we grew up in evangelicalism. These weird, all movements have been trying to generate clicks for all of human history. It's just true. Like so much of human thought in a pervasive cultural way can be boiled down to clickbait. We've always operated that way. We have always read the headline and not the article.
Yeah.
Or we've always read the article that we agree with and not the one that we don't. And that's where I think like that might be one of those like Westworld things that maybe the human race never gets to the tipping point where we get past that. And I think the problem is that we may never get as a species. This is like the really not scary thing, but just like, well, it's kind of scary actually.
Yeah, it is.
Like humanity really may never get to a point where it's more interested in a broad truth than it is about a personal truth. And that sounds like, it's funny because like growing up in evangelicalism, that would be taken as, I think, like nobody wants to believe the gospel because it's offensive to them. And it's like, you could go person by person and break down the fact that, and this is not true across the board. I'm not in any like religious movement. I think there have been a tremendous number, or non-religious movement. There's been, if that's a thing, like I'm sure there's someone who's like, well, I don't know, atheism is a religion. That's fine. We can break it down that way for sure. I've done that before. I've been that person before, but a while ago. But I just mean like the point of it is like you can find genuine, compassionate people, thoughtful people in any of these movements.
Yes.
But the problem is that they tend to be pushed forward by things that are meant to cause a reaction. And then they want the audience to extrapolate based on what the reaction is. there's no difference between a BuzzFeed article and a lot of sermons that I've heard. There's no difference between a BuzzFeed article and a lot of like music criticism that I've read, where like you just want to expand you want to grow your personal reality and make your personal reality universal. Sadly, that's not possible, but humanity can't stop doing it.
Yeah.
We can't stop needing it so bad.
Because, yeah, and it's very built on immediacy as opposed to sort of a lasting truth. I know. Speaking to music, that's sort of a silly way to add more gravity to it than it maybe deserves. But
I don't think it's adding more than it deserves. Keep going.
Yeah,
I think it's a great point.
I guess just I notice that sort of trend, which I'm just reiterating what you've already said, but just having an answer or an opinion, a loud one that matters right now, but overall it does not matter at all.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing that like, and it's just true, and it like I find these times when we're talking on your show meaningful, like interesting. Like I love talking to you about stuff, right? So like, and I think that interesting conversations from anyone, whoever they are, is always a thing that I want to plug into.
Yeah.
And I would quantify interesting as having at least a grasp of the complexity of the issue.
Yeah.
And the nuance of it. And I think like the tipping point for humanity at some point, if it exists, is realizing, somehow pervasively realizing that we are literally all the same. And we, for some reason, deeply believe that we're not. And we have religious structures or philosophical structures or economic structures or social structures that are built around the idea that we are not all the same. We have even sat in churches and had people say that thing and have it resolve on like, okay, we better get everybody to join our club or else. So if you leave, there's fallen people and awake people, basically, right? Like there are people who are still asleep and people who are saved. Instead of like, dude, there are 7 billion people on a fucking weird planet in the middle of, as far as we can tell, in the middle of nowhere. Everywhere in the universe is the middle of nowhere, as far as we can tell. And we're flying around at an alarming rate. And like, we still can't just get over the hump of like, I'm just a person who lives in a place.
Yeah.
And I have ambitions that sometimes are bigger than my capability or sometimes are bigger than my comfort zone. And we have been affected so much by, think about the birth of suburban dread. Like, indie rock was built on it, right? Like, the idea of we all live in the same houses. We all live in the same houses. We all drive the same cars. We all go to the same places. And we're all fucking sheep. But I'm not a sheep because I listen to Arcade Fire. Like, how stupid is that?
Yeah.
Like, humanity is the same. And that's why I think that's one of those stupid... I love indie rock so much. It's one of my favorite things ever. But that's when, looking back on it, I think that's one of those weird kind of loosely destructive things. Like ideas that it's like more meaningful or human to be sad all the time. That could be well, I just mean in the sense that like that's possibly true in an academic sense, in the sense of like you are maybe aware of more things that are going on.
Yes.
But that's not how it was communicated, right? Like, because I think if you think about reality in the way that it is, it's hard not to be sober-minded about it. Like, the only way to not be sober-minded about the world and the human condition is to not understand it. Or to ignore it, or to understand it and just ignore it. But I think like indie rock pushed this idea that like our parents ruined everything And the way to find real meaning was to be a counterpoint to all of the sheep around you in the grocery store.
Yeah.
And all you're doing is projecting on them. You don't know those people.
Exactly. Yeah.
You have no fucking idea. You don't know what the woman with her 2 kids or the like guy in the golf shirt or whatever who's looking, you know, who has like a 6-pack and like a frozen pizza, or the person in like the yoga like we do this all the time. And it's funny, like cultural criticism is funny. I don't think it's that meaningful. Like,
right.
Because like ultimately it doesn't fucking matter if a bunch of people want to pay $20 for an avocado toast thing in Brooklyn. That's what they want to do. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change your life at all. And if you're like, I only eat steak, that's what real people do. Oh, who cares? Like, but we develop opinions. I think indie rock was, a ton of things have done this. It's not just indie rock, but I mean, like indie rock was probably one of the more annoying in that respect. It was one of the more annoying things of like, we're all the sad, greasy kids who are just so over the machine. And it's like, dude, the machine you're talking about is the human experience. Like, if you're talking about like government, it's been a machine forever. Yeah. And we all just live in it. And if anything, we should be developing a compassion for the fact that because of our nature, we can't ever seem to escape ourselves.
Yeah.
And everybody lives in that. Every single person.
Yeah.
Like, even the people that we hate, they still live in that.
Right.
And I think there's a compassionate element to that. I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that? Is that bullshit?
No, not at all. And I know what you mean about indie rock perpetuating that idea of just because it immediately creates an us and them. Mm-hmm. Like, we're the ones who were so creative and like we see past all the bullshit, and like
it's no different than being evangelical.
Yeah, basically.
You have the light.
Right. We have the secret knowledge.
Yeah,
and you are of the world.
You see up past the curtain. Everybody else is asleep and I'm awake. Which is the great irony of it. I hate irony as like an operative like tool in culture, but it's fucking ironic to think about how similar like insular indie culture was to evangelicalism.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it boils down to, you were kind of touching on this earlier, but just we have a deep desire to be, especially in the West in 2017, a deep desire for individualism, a deep desire to be different than the others, a sort of need to prove that we're different, that we're woke, that we're aware, and pretend like we're somehow above the people around us who have to go to their jobs and go to the grocery store and get their oil changed, and we're just not. And I mean, for sure, certain people, and perhaps creative people especially, do have a deeper level of observation of what's around them.
They have like a sensitivity that maybe not everybody has.
Yeah,
sure.
And sort of an awareness of like, wow, the world is bleak and hard and dark and scary. But yeah, at some point you have to come back around and just be like, but so am I.
Right.
And I have to keep existing in this. And there's no way to create an insulated world where you just live with all your woke friends and like criticize those who are lower than you.
Right.
I mean, that's no way to live.
No, totally. And I think like, and that's the thing too, is that I think the counterpoint or the clarification on that, because not on what you said and what I said earlier, because I think that's a great point, is that like a part of compassion. So I would say that any idea that you hold that doesn't generate compassion in you is like suspect. Like if it doesn't generate a deeper curiosity or understanding for the people, whoever your version of the outcasts are, because everybody has one. And if you're not interested in how they think or who they are, or not, I don't mean like you need to go meet them, but I'm saying that like if you can't, because in what I would like, and I think the caveat there is that like a part of compassion is identifying really awful trends in humanity. So like racism, like it's compassionate to speak out against racism. Mm-hmm. It's not, you're not doing a disservice to people who are really racist. right? Like you think about, for instance, like this, it's like a really curious thing I think in the New Testament with where Christ calls, I think the Sadducees or the Pharisees or both, a den of vipers,
Mm-hmm.
which I think was like sort of a Judaic reference to a text that I don't know, or that maybe it's in the Old Testament, maybe it's not.
Yeah,
but
it was
like,
a big diss at the time,
right?
For sure.
And so, but I think, but honestly, like I think like when I haven't read the Bible in a while, but when the last time I read that, or the last few times I read that passage, it's like it's stuck in my mind as like weirdly that was the most compassionate thing that Jesus could say to those people. Is like, this is what you currently are, not that this is. And that's where I think it goes. That's not that like, that's what you currently are right now. And that's kind of a wake up call, right? If somebody comes up to you and is like, you've been a real asshole. You're like, oh shit. If it's someone that you know, okay, well, not everybody does that. A lot of people get angry because they don't want to be an asshole and they just whatever. But I mean, like a statement like that is similar to being like, dude, that was really racist, or you're really racist, or like if you met like a KKK member, it's not compassionate to be like, I don't know, man, like I think your idea has some like weight to it and we should talk about that. Like I think we are evolved, like we are waking up as a world of like, dude, we do a lot of fucked up shit.
Mm-hmm.
And not calling it fucked up is the opposite of being understanding or like loving or considerate or anything. It's like, no, this can't keep happening. Like love is severe at times, but I think that like, and it should be, but I think that like it should be severe in a loving way. I don't mean that like, oh, it's abusive sometimes. What I mean by that is like love understands, like love sees something very clearly for what it is. And I think like if the idea that you, and this is why I think like, for instance, Pure Comedy is actually like Father John Misty's most compassionate album, is that like, he's just he's turning the mirror around on like some ideas and culture and some things that exist in culture that are just absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just have to call things absurd or bad or awful or evil. Like, I think evil does exist, even if it's not a capital E evil. I think people do evil shit and they shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And we should stop them from doing it. You know what I mean? So like from that perspective, I just think like, if you don't believe something about the world though, that like expands your understanding and your compassion for the human condition and like an awareness of it, then I think like what you believe is bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you're either swimming upstream or you're getting pulled back, right? Like there's no stasis. I don't think stasis exists in an ideological, in a world in which like we're a species of ideology in a lot of ways. Like we have the ability to have ideologies. As far as I know, dogs don't have ideologies. They might. I've owned 3 of them and none of them seem to be like, I didn't find them gathered with one of them on a box talking to the other ones, right? I mean, maybe it happened when I was asleep, but it's like we have ideologies and those ideologies have caused a lot of hurt and pain and a lot of good. And I just think like as we grow as a species, as we continue to progress, it's good for the Lauren Dukas of the world to go on Twitter or go on the Tucker Carlson show and be like, dude, basically like you are full of shit and this is bad. That's good. That's like a loving thing to do. That's an awareness. Like that's somebody to, not to pun the wokeness, but that's like, I don't like that. I mean, I just can't use that word. Whatever, dude. I'm 29.
Sure.
I'm not saying it's bad to use. I'm saying like I'm a 29-year-old frumpy dude. I'm not going to go around saying that, but
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
know what you mean.
it's like that's someone who's awake.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're believing something that doesn't make you more awake, in a sense that, and by awake, I mean like, oh, I listen when people talk to me.
Yeah.
Or I go to the store and I think about the people in the store in a way that isn't dependent on my superiority.
Yeah.
Just the granola, like the nuts and bolts of our real life. Like I don't go into 7-Eleven and secretly think that I'm better than the person who's like helping me pay for a candy bar.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't go to a movie theater and think that like everybody there who doesn't seem to be like me is dumb. Or seeing people go into a movie I don't like or that I think is dumb, and be like, those people are all stupid.
Yeah.
Like, just that's the real human experience. And I think, like, if you don't have a compassion in those instances, then I think there's just cause for concern. Like, I think that what you think is not what you think it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry for the rant on that.
No, that's good stuff. Well, as we're wrapping up, Tyler.
Yeah,
that's me riffing on
there we
my
go.
earlier.
I love it. Yeah, totally.
Hey, would you feel weird about talking about your? Well, okay. So between the last time we did this and now, you launched a Patreon for your writing.
I did.
Like,
yeah.
that's pretty recent. Would you just talk briefly about what that is and like?
Yeah, totally. I did it because I've been writing for a long time. I write like prose poems, some small, some longer, but like, I've wanted to do a book of them for a long time. And I launched a Patreon because I wanted to keep myself accountable to writing. And I wanted to like start to gather, like, I just wanted to have like more eyes on the stuff I was writing. And the stuff on my Patreon is basically through the end of the summer, or probably through the end of the fall, is going to operate as kind of like at least the like middle 70% chunk, or we'll see how much there is. It might be the middle 30% chunk. I don't know yet how much will be up there, but of like first drafts for my first book of poems.
Yeah.
The name of the book is Big Sad, and I am working on that now. I try to post at least one poem a week. Sometimes, like, there's a week where I did like 4 or 5, and then one I was traveling and I just did one.
Yeah.
But where, like, yeah, it's $1 to follow along. $5 gets you a monthly Skype call with like a beer or whatever you drink. If you don't drink, it's totally fine too. But where we've only done one so far, but where I just bring a couple things I've been thinking about to ask everybody about and talk about, hang out for digitally for a few hours and drink beer. But yeah, I mean, that's the Patreon. It's just Tyler Barstow. I think if you just search for Tyler Barstow, my last name is Barstow. My first name is Tyler. A lot of people call me Taylor sometimes, so it's not Taylor, it's Tyler. That's okay. It's understandable. I mean, whatever, it's fine. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's once I have enough to where I feel like the project is done. I mean, the impetus was like, I'm in the middle of a divorce, and I think that put me in a place that was not so much like, yeah, I got to like milk this for emotion. It was more of like, I need to write a book. Like, I've been writing for 10 years, and I have all this stuff that doesn't really apply to me anymore. And I've read back through a lot of it, and it was just like, it's not that I think it sucked or something, although there's a lot of things I would change about some of it, but it's just like, I don't resonate with the like material there. And I wanted to write something. I wanted to sort of write my way through what was going on in my life in a way that, because it was like, I've been in like really deep, or like, I've been in dark places before, but it's been like a really particularly dark and deep place.
Yeah.
And I don't mean deep as in like a well. I mean deep as in like the middle of the fucking ocean.
Yeah.
And like, if I fall out of the boat, I am fucked. Like that kind of thing. And it was just like, I wanted to write for my own sake, for therapy and other things. Like, I wanted to write my way through like what this is like to go through.
Right.
And I think a part of it is that, like, therapy, in the fallout from it, you go back through your whole life, and it's like you're unpacking a lot of stuff that's like bad or like rotten in you. And like, not just so much just things you've done, but also just the way you've made decisions, the way you've thought about yourself, the way you've thought about other people, the way all these things that start coming to the surface when you start exploring like a particular deep pain. It tends to take you down to the bottom of yourself, and then there's like a hell of a lot more down there
Yeah.
it ends up being almost like a shaft that runs all the way down to like the center of you, and you find all this stuff that's not good and stuff that is good that you've like called not good. And so I just wanted to like write through that process, and so that's what the book will be about. And it'll be probably 60 poems or something, 60 or 70 poems. So so yeah, Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search for Tyler Barstow, and you'll find my page, and you can do what you want from there.
Right.
So
yeah. Well, I wanted to draw attention to it just because, one, and I mean this so genuinely, like, I'm proud of you for putting it out there, because I recognize the vulnerability, one, of just putting your material out, period. Two, asking people to pay for it. And three, just the fact that it is coming from this very particular moment of life for you. Yeah, I don't know. So I commend you for doing that.
Thank
I think
you, dude. That means a lot.
That's great, because I know you well enough to know that you probably had some like inner trepidation about that, or just some fear, maybe, you know.
Well, it's yeah. Well, there was always, and this is something I've always admired about you, is that like you've put out, like you've published a lot of stuff, you've made a movie, and like you've always like, I've known you for 3 years, so not a ton of time, but like you've always been somebody who was just kind of quietly doing your thing. I don't mean quietly in that people didn't care about it. I mean quietly in the sense that you just were doing it. And I think that like I had a lot of, I don't know, like the stuff I write is not like, I went to school with, or knew in school, a person who was voted like best young poet in America by Rattle magazine. And she got her MFA from Columbia. And then a good friend of mine from college, Matt McFarlane, got his MFA from UVA. And it's like when I read their stuff, or especially when I used to read their stuff, I mean, I still feel out of my weight class, but when I used to, it was just like, okay, I got to get up to that level somehow before I would ever even think about it. And at the bottom of it was that I felt there was a fear in me that it was like, writing is maybe the thing I'm best at, and I don't want to put something out and have it be bad, no, it's not even that. I didn't want to put something out and have people think it's bad.
Sure.
Because like, that's not even, I don't even know that I had like, it was a worse fear. It was that like, I wanted approval for my writing.
Totally. Yeah.
And like, I wanted people to think that I was a good writer, and I could never get to a place where I felt like I was one. And it was a combination probably of like laziness and fear. And at times it was like times where like I wasn't writing stuff I was into or whatever. But yeah, I wanted to like, okay, I'm doing this. And if it's bad, it's bad. If I write a bad book of poems about divorce, then I did.
Sure.
And it was bad or whatever, right? Like I did it, and it was helpful for me to do.
Yeah.
And if people like it, great. If they're like, if Rattle magazine is like, this is the worst young poet in America, then I'll be like, okay, that sucks. But I need to get past. I've needed to knock a lot of those like ego walls down. I mean, it's like a very subtle form of egotistic, like being like egoism.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to see me unless I know that they're going to think I'm the best. And I think any creative thing is like taking your clothes off in front of a bunch of people. And well, not a bunch, and not a lot of people follow my writing. Well, I don't know how many people do, but I just mean like, I'm not saying there's 100,000, but I just mean like, it's like just taking your clothes off in a room of people you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just being like, and I never wanted to do that until I felt like everyone was going to be like, oh my God, that dude's Brad Pitt, right? Like that's so stupid, but you want to be this idealized thing.
Of course.
And I was just so insecure and afraid and like kind of narcissistic. I think a lot of those things are symptoms of like, I mean, in that particular way, I was just very self-obsessed, and I wanted to get over it. And I wanted to I needed real help, and writing is a way that I find that. And so maybe more than anything. And so it just kind of forced the issue. It was like, if I don't write, I'm going to fucking explode.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Definitely.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I appreciate that though.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm learning more and more that is exactly what you just described. Like, that is what you have to do when putting something out. You have to just push aside comparison to others who are presumably or like in your own assumption more qualified, or that they've got it more together, or that they've had more training, or whatever it is, or even, God forbid, a bigger following. And it's just like, no, just do it. And like, you are. And that's what I hope I'm doing too. And
well, that's what I hope anybody listening to this who wants to do that should do. Like, you get better. The only way you get better is by people seeing your stuff.
Yes.
And for people seeing you for who you are.
Absolutely.
And I like, business will do that to you. Like, being an entrepreneur will do that to you. You'll have business partners that will say every possible criticism of you, mostly true, some not always, but that's the only way that you get better.
Yeah.
You don't get better by like hiding behind somebody thinking that you're good at something when you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, you cannot craft a masterpiece in the dark and just like reveal it all at once and expect universal acclaim.
Like every great, not every, but a lot of great artists have released their best work between their 6th and 8th album. And I'm talking about like the Beatles, or depending on who you talk to, but like the Beatles or like Kanye or whatever. Like, it's like anybody, and those are people who have been doing what people have said are like brilliant work for a long time. But it's like, you got to write your like Love Me Do first.
Yeah.
And you might write a bunch of shit before that that's not that you think is, and it's not that great. And then later, maybe you do write it. And then that's the beginning of, then 20 years later, maybe you write your Sgt. Pepper's.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like, you can't start there, I don't think.
Yeah.
Most people can't. Wes Anderson maybe could, but Bottle Rocket's not as good as his new stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah. Let's call it right there.
Yeah,
boom.
Dude, thank you.
Done.
Man.
Thank you, as always. I love this so
Same.
much. Yeah.
Same.